Dun dun dun! Are you wondering what the riskiest topics that you could broach could be on your college admissions essays? If so, stay tuned, because in this video I'm talking about the riskiest college application essay topics. If you're wondering who I am, my name is Brooke. I've been coaching students in the college essay process for over a decade and a half. I've helped students gain admission to Harvard, Stanford, Princeton, Yale, almost every top 10 university you can think of. If you're studying for standardized tests, remember I have 2 courses for the SAT and the ACT. I've helped coach students to perfect scores on both exams, and all the secrets that help those kids get perfects are in those courses. So definitely go check those out. I've also got 2 books on the ACT math section, which I've scored perfectly on and coached lots of students to perfect scores on. So check those out at Amazon, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. Those are our social channels. Follow us there. You can also subscribe to our YouTube channel, which is totally free, totally easy. And the other thing that's free is our mailing list, SupertutorTV.com/subscribe. Sign up, join us. We will send you reminders of videos and stuff that we have. Awesome, cool. Okay, so risky doesn't mean that it can't be a great essay. Risky means it's really hard to pull off, and sometimes it doesn't work. Let's have a little story time. A couple of years ago, I worked with a student, and at the end of one of his essays that he wrote, just sort of off the cuff, he was talking about an internship that he had, and he started to get into some questions of stereotyping and sexism. Just a little bit, just like a little sprinkle at the bottom, at the end. And I was like, whoa, I see the makings of a really interesting idea. And I started a conversation with him, and I was like, tell me more about this, and tell me more about this, and tell me more about that. And we got into this really interesting conversation about gender. And he's a guy. And I thought, wow, could be a really interesting essay. And I pushed him to write it. And I was like, you should write this essay. So he ran off, he wrote that essay. Didn't come back to me right away. He first brought it to his counselor at school, and his counselor at school read it and said, you can't write this. This is offensive. You can't do this. And I had to get on the phone with his parents and talk them off the ledge and tell them, no, this is a risk. You're right. It's risky. But if he can pull it off, I think it's going to be awesome. And that essay helped him get into Yale, where he is now an undergraduate. So just because it's risky doesn't mean it's bad. It just means it's tough to pull off. And that brings me to my first topic of risk. My first risky essay topic is racism or sexism, particularly if you're white or male. It's really hard to talk about racism and sexism if you're from the other group, because a lot of people will get upset or challenged, especially if you are kind of not really holding the minority's viewpoint. So my advice, if you're going to take this on and you happen to be in one of these groups and your essay touches on one of these in some way, even if you're talking about something super interesting and maybe it intersects with something that you do. I mean, maybe you want to talk about gender in sports, right? That's a really interesting topic. Why are women in soccer treated differently than men who play soccer, right? So if we can dive in and if we can talk about it in an intelligent way without being too offensive and carefully choose our words and be able to very, very carefully get in there and discuss something that's hard to discuss, that can make for a really awesome essay. But you got to be careful. And my best advice is, if you're writing on these topics, give your essay to multiple people and make sure that they're not offended by it. And if they are and they tell you you can't write that, that doesn't mean you can't write that. But it does mean you need to soften your language if you really believe in it. Though sometimes it really does mean you can't write that. I'm going to give you guys another example of an essay that I saw from a student several years ago. I had a white male student bring me an essay about reverse racism and how he's discriminated against because he's not a person of color and he's a male. And so all the feminists and all the people of color get advantages over him, and he has to work twice as hard because he doesn't have those free handouts in terms of scholarships and college admissions and other things. And I was like, you can't write this. This is completely offensive. There's no magic there. So the other thing about risky essay topics is some versions of them really are horrible. And you really should stay away from them because they're just going to be too offensive. And you just can't. You don't know who's reading your essay. And there's a probably 50% chance it's a woman. And chances are that woman is going to be off-put or offended, one or the other, or at least think that you're going to off-put or offend someone else. And completely offending people is a way to go closed, file closed, goodbye. I'm definitely not letting you in. So racism, sexism, that's kind of my first topic. You got to be careful. The next one is your disease, disorder, or learning disability. I certainly have helped students write essays about a learning disability that made me cry and that were fabulous and wonderful and that just felt like someone is singing their best self out of, the voice that comes out from inside of themselves. And you read it and you're touched by it and you're just like, wow, this is awesome and amazing, okay? If you have a disease, a disorder, or a learning disability, and you can write an essay that is so wow wonderful that says, I have these issues, but but my human spirit has overcome them. And it doesn't mean that the problem has gone away. It means that you have this power of the human spirit that gives us all chills. And that when I read it, I am humbled and I am brought to this place with you where I read your essay and your humanity and wonderfulness is undeniable. If you are able to pull that off, do it, kudos, props to you. But I will tell you, it is really hard to write about a learning disability and make it shine. It is really hard to write about a disease or a disorder and sound like a champion. 70% of the essays that I see that are about a disease, a disorder, or a learning disability generally work against the student and not for the student. And I'm not saying you can't write about it. And I'm also not saying that some of you are going to be able to avoid it, because for some of you, it's so self-defining, right? You have to talk about it, right? Some of you have to talk about it. There's no way around it. But it doesn't mean that it's an easy essay to write. It's not an easy essay to write. For one, you don't want to be Debbie Downer. You don't want to depress people. When people read your college essay, you don't want them to walk away and feel sad and feel lonely and feel like depressed, right? That's kind of awkward. You want people to feel good about your essay. You want them to fall in love with you and how wonderful you are. And if you're just talking about a disease or a disorder the whole time, it can be really like downer or sad, right? With learning disabilities, colleges want you to be able to compete within their environment. So you are taking a massive risk by going out on a limb and exposing your vulnerabilities when you talk about a learning disability. It doesn't mean you can't do it. But it also is exposing a weakness and a vulnerability that could subconsciously or consciously make them not want to bring you in. So make sure that if you're going to talk about them, that the redemptive factor, the power factor of your essay is worth the trade-off, is worth the vulnerability. Okay, third one. This is what I get all the haters from, by the way, is community service. Community service is really hard to write about. So how do we write about community service and why is it a problem? So the first reason community service is a problem is that so many of you write about it and so many of you write about the same experiences. Volunteering with children is probably the most common volunteer work that high school students do. When you volunteer with children, helping them academically in some way is the most common type of community service that students do, like underprivileged kids. And it could be reading to kids, it could be doing math, it could be tutoring after school, whatever it is. But that is the most common. So if that's what you were going to write your essay about, just know half the people applying to this college are writing about the same thing. And it is really hard to stand out when you write about stuff that everybody's written about. The other problem with community service is that there's this inherent I am bigger than you problem, which makes it seem self-aggrandizing, right? When you talk about community service, you're like, I have done something wonderful for the poor people, for the people in my community who needed help. And you sound so grandiloquent, lovely, and hoity-toity. And these people you're helping should be thankful for all the help you've bestowed upon them, right? And it doesn't come off very well. It comes off as privileged and entitled. And that's the other problem with community service, is that oftentimes when you guys write about it, you sound like snobs. And it's hard to pull off. It doesn't mean you can't write about it, but if you're going to write about a community service, my tip to you guys is to do one of two things. I either want you to bring the people who you're working with high, or you need to go low. Does that make sense? Either bring up those people that you're working with to a height where they're like, towering over you in some way, or bring yourself low, right? Humble yourself out so that you meet in the middle, right? Brilliant community service essays I've worked with students on have been essays where students put themselves on the same level with the people that they're working with, where they find a camaraderie, where they learn from them, right? Several years ago, for example, I had a student who wrote an essay about an activity that he led for seniors at a community center. And what was awesome about the essay was the conviviality of it, was that he put himself on their level and they put themselves on his, and that he let himself be like the grandson to these old people, right? And at the same time, he was leading them and they were leading him. And so there was sort of this mutual respect and they were at the same level. So if you can level the playing field, if you can make yourself seem like equals, you can pull this essay off, but it's really hard to do. So just be very careful with community service. Don't seem too hoity-toity. Make sure that you're authentic. And remember, you need to stand out in some way. I know you think what you're doing is original. but it might not be as original as you think it is. And just take that into consideration and make your essay shine and be unique. Cool. My last topic that's risky is politics. I know you guys know politics is risky. Heck, our whole country is divided into two polar spheres of political thought, and they live in different vortexes of news, and people get swirled into a whirlwind of what they believe, and they only listen to the tunnel of what they believe. If you're going to talk about politics, you somehow have to bridge that gap. You can write really awesome essays on political ideas, but if you do, you have to be open and a listener. You have to be open to other people's points of view, and you cannot be my way or the highway. It doesn't work. And you never know who's going to read your essay, right? Even if you apply to a super liberal college, you might get somebody who's a little bit conservative. If you apply to a more conservative area, you might have somebody who's liberal. You never know who's going to be reading your essay. So no matter what perspective you have to present this in a way that is digestible to any side. You don't want to isolate people, and you don't want to make people feel like they're shut out, and you don't want to seem like you don't listen to other perspectives. You want to seem like you do. Again, my best advice if you're writing about polarizing topics is get other people to read it, and get people to read it who don't agree with you, and ask them if they're offended by it, right? And that's kind of the best way to stay safe if you delve into political territory. That's all I've got for this time, guys. Thanks so much for watching. I hope these tips helped you a little bit to know how to navigate the minefields of risky essay topics. And hopefully, whether you decide to take some risks and go for it, or whether you decide to play it safe so you don't end up in a landmine, I wish you the best of luck with your applications. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye.